I never imagined that the person with whom I shared 10 years of my life would betray me in such a calculated and cruel way. When I returned from that 3-week business trip, I found our $1.2 million home virtually empty. Furniture, cars, bank accounts, everything had disappeared along with Rebecca. Devastated and unable to understand how she had managed to access accounts that were solely in my name, I realized I had been manipulated for years. But what Rebecca didn't know is that I had suspected her for months and had been secretly documenting every suspicious move. What I revealed to my lawyer not only secured me the recovery of everything that was rightfully mine, but also exposed to the world the true face of the woman who swore to love me until death do us part. You won't believe what I discovered when I began investigating her past. This is my story. My life has always been based on trust and hard work. I was born into a middle-class family in Chicago, where I learned early on that honesty and dedication were non-negotiable values. My father, William Miller, worked as a civil engineer, and my mother, Sarah, was a high school math teacher. They taught me to value education and integrity above all else. I grew up in a stable home, where arguments were resolved through dialogue and mutual respect. Perhaps that's why I developed an almost unshakable belief in the best in people, especially those I loved. A naivete that, years later, would cost me dearly. My name is Nathan Miller, I'm 38 years old, and I work as a software engineer specializing in cybersecurity. After graduating with honors from MIT, I built a solid career in technology companies, eventually becoming a senior consultant for large corporations across the country. My specialty was protecting systems against intruders, a bitter irony considering how I failed to protect my own life against the intruder who slept next to me every night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I met Rebecca Johnson 10 years ago at a tech conference in Boston. She was stunning, blonde hair that fell in soft waves to her shoulders, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. But it wasn't just her beauty that drew me in. Rebecca was intelligent, articulate, and passionate about her work as a digital marketing consultant. During a panel on data privacy, she asked such a powerful and well-formulated question that it blew my mind. At the closing cocktail party, I summoned the courage to approach her, and we chatted for hours, long after everyone else had left. Our connection was immediate and intense. We discovered that we shared not only professional interests but also tastes in literature, film, and music. We both loved classical jazz, Hitchcock films, and traveling to remote places. We exchanged numbers that night, and the very next day we were having lunch together. A week later, we had our first official date, a dinner at Le Bernardin in New York, where I'd flown especially to see her. I remember thinking, as I watched Rebecca laugh at a joke I'd made, that I might have found the person I would spend the rest of my life with. Over the next few months, our relationship blossomed despite the distance, me in Chicago, she in New York. We met on weekends, alternating between the two cities, and when we weren't physically together, we spent hours talking on the phone. Rebecca was attentive, supportive, and seemed genuinely interested in every aspect of my life. She asked me about my work, my family, my dreams for the future. And I, completely smitten, shared everything without hesitation or reservation. After 8 months of dating long distance, Rebecca mentioned that she was considering a job offer in Chicago. It would be easier for us, she said during one of our weekend dinners. Besides, the company is offering a really attractive package. I was ecstatic at the idea of finally being in the same city, building a relationship without the complications of distance. 2 weeks later, she was moving into an apartment just 10 minutes from mine. Looking back now, I realize I should have questioned why she was willing to uproot her life in New York so quickly. At the time, I interpreted it as a sign of her commitment to us. How foolish I was. The next 6 months were like a dream. We had dinner together almost every night, spent weekends exploring Chicago or relaxing at home, and our relationship seemed to deepen with each passing day. One spring evening, during a boat trip on Lake Michigan, I proposed to Rebecca. I had planned everything meticulously, the perfect sunset, a bottle of 2005 Cristal champagne, which cost $350, and a 2-carat Tiffany solitaire diamond ring, $18,000. When I got down on one knee and opened the small blue velvet box, Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, Nathan. 1,000 times yes," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me so tightly she nearly knocked us over. In that moment, I felt like the luckiest man in the world. We decided on a relatively small wedding, with just close friends and family. Rebecca surprisingly didn't insist on an extravagant ceremony, something I attributed to her practical nature at the time. "It's being together that matters, not the party," she said, and I wholeheartedly agreed. We married at a vineyard in Napa Valley, California, with just 75 guests. It was a perfect day, mild weather, clear skies, and the woman I loved promising to spend eternity by my side. Photos from that day still show my genuine, carefree smile, the smile of someone unaware of the approaching storm. For the first 2 years of our marriage, we settled into our routine in Chicago. Rebecca continued working in digital marketing, although she changed jobs twice during that time, always for better opportunities, as she put it. I steadily progressed in my career, taking on more important projects and building a solid reputation in the cybersecurity field. We bought our first apartment together, a spacious loft in the West Loop that cost $680,000. It was a significant investment, but we felt like we were building our future. It was during this period that I noticed the first subtle signs that something might be wrong. Rebecca began shopping more frequently, purchasing expensive clothes, designer handbags, and jewelry. When I gently mentioned the increased spending, she immediately became defensive. "I'm working hard, Nathan. Can't I treat myself a little?" she said, with an irritation that took me by surprise. Not wanting to create conflict, I backed away. After all, she was right, we both worked hard, and our combined incomes allowed us to live comfortably. Besides, I always assumed we could discuss finances openly when necessary. 3 years after our wedding, I received an offer to work at a tech company in Portland, Oregon. The salary was considerably higher, $185,000 a year, plus bonuses and benefits, and the job was exactly what I'd always wanted. I was hesitant to accept at first, worried about how Rebecca would react to the idea of moving again. To my surprise, she was enthusiastic. "Portland has an incredible tech scene," she said. "I can easily find opportunities there, and I've heard the quality of life is fantastic." Her positive reaction dispelled my doubts, and within 2 months, we were selling our Chicago apartment and moving to the West Coast. In Portland, we bought a house in Lake Oswego, an upscale suburb known for its excellent schools and family-friendly atmosphere. The property cost $1.2 million, a significant investment, but justified by my new salary and Rebecca's career prospects. The house was spacious, with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, an office, and a well-maintained backyard overlooking the lake. It seemed like the perfect place to eventually raise a family, though Rebecca always found reasons to postpone the discussion about children. "Let's enjoy a few more years, just the 2 of us," she would say. "We have plenty of time." The first few years in Portland were good. Rebecca found a job at a respected digital marketing agency, and I was thriving in my new position. We had a pleasant social circle, mostly co-workers, and a few neighbors with whom we got along well. We traveled frequently, Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, Sydney, always staying in luxury hotels and enjoying the best each destination had to offer. These were the times when I felt most connected with Rebecca, away from the distractions of work and daily routine, just the 2 of us exploring new places and making memories. However, as we spent more time in Portland, I began to notice subtle changes in Rebecca. She became increasingly emotionally distant, more irritable when I asked about her day, more secretive about her activities. Her social calendar expanded to include people I'd never met, co-workers, professional contacts, and a mysterious friend named Ashley who had seemingly become her closest confidant. When I expressed interest in meeting these people, Rebecca always found excuses. You wouldn't be interested in the conversation, or, it's just a quick work thing, she'd say, effectively excluding me from an ever-increasing part of her life. Our discussions about finances also became more tense. Rebecca insisted that we deserved to live well and frequently questioned why I was so controlling when I expressed concern about overspending. To avoid conflict, I began to give in more and more, allowing her to take greater control over our joint finances. It was a colossal mistake that I would only realize too late. 5 years after our move to Portland, we would have celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary. I planned a surprise trip to Hawaii, booking a suite at the Four Seasons in Maui for 10 days at a cost of $12,000. When I presented the tickets to Rebecca as an anniversary gift, her reaction was lukewarm. "That's sweet, Nathan, but I have an important project during those dates. Couldn't we reschedule?" It was the first time I'd truly felt rejected by her, and the feeling was devastating. We rescheduled the trip for 3 months later, and although we went, the magic I'd hoped for never materialized. Rebecca spent much of the time on the phone, supposedly dealing with work emergencies, or isolated with a book on the beach. We returned home feeling as if we'd taken 2 separate trips that coincidentally happened to be in the same location. It was around this time that I began noticing discrepancies in our bank accounts. Small ones at first, unexplained transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, larger than normal ATM withdrawals, purchases at stores Rebecca never mentioned visiting. When I asked about these transactions, she always had a plausible explanation. "Oh, I was helping Ashley with her apartment bills," or, "I needed money to buy you a surprise gift." I accepted these explanations because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative, that my wife was deliberately lying to me, was too painful to contemplate. In early 2023, I received an offer to lead a cybersecurity project for a large Japanese corporation. The job would require me to spend 3 weeks in Tokyo implementing and testing new security protocols. It was a significant professional opportunity, with the potential to expand my reputation internationally and open doors to future global projects. When I mentioned it to Rebecca, she strongly encouraged me to accept. "It's exactly the kind of opportunity you deserve," she said, with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in a long time. At the time, I interpreted it as a positive sign for our relationship. She was supporting my career, recognizing my professional value. How naive I was. Preparation for the trip was intense. I spent weeks studying the Japanese company's specific systems, familiarizing myself with their existing protocols, and developing detailed implementation plans. Rebecca seemed genuinely interested in the project, asking questions about the technical details and offering insightful suggestions. In the days leading up to my departure, she was exceptionally attentive, preparing my favorite meals, helping with packing, ensuring I had everything I needed for 3 weeks in Japan. "I want you to focus solely on work, not worrying about things here," she said, in a gesture I now recognize as calculatedly manipulative. I left for Tokyo on March 3, 2023, leaving Rebecca with full access to our home, our joint accounts, and a complete trust that now seems almost criminally naive to me. For the first week, we communicated several times a day through texts and video calls. She asked about my work, shared updates on her daily life, and expressed how much she missed me. She sent photos of dinners she'd cooked for herself, books she was reading, even selfies with exaggeratedly sad expressions to show how lonely she was without me. Everything seemed normal, the kind of communication you'd expect between a temporarily separated couple. By the second week, I noticed a subtle change. Video calls became less frequent, with Rebecca citing late work meetings or social engagements as reasons for not being available during our usual hours. Her messages were shorter, less detailed, often just generic answers to my questions. When we did manage to video chat, she seemed distracted, often looking away from the screen or checking her phone while we spoke. "Is everything okay?" I asked during one of these calls. "Sure, I'm just tired." "Work has been crazy," she replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. By the 3rd week, the change became impossible to ignore. Rebecca began missing our scheduled calls entirely, sending short apologetic messages afterward. Sorry, I was with Ashley and we lost track of time. Or, I just got out of a meeting that lasted hours. Can we talk tomorrow? When we finally did manage to talk, she seemed rushed, ending calls after just a few minutes with excuses about other commitments. I began to feel restless, a sense that something was wrong, but I rationalized that it was just the stress of the separation, combined with the pressure of my job in Tokyo, that was making me imagine problems where none existed. On March 21st, 3 days before my scheduled return, I had a particularly disturbing call with Rebecca. When I asked about her weekend plans, she vaguely replied that she had some commitments, but would be home Sunday night to greet me. When I pressed for more details, she became irritated. Why the interrogation, Nathan? Can't I have my own life while you're away? The response left me stunned, not only by its content but by its hostile tone, which was completely disproportionate to my innocent question. Sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm just looking forward to getting home, I replied, trying to defuse the situation. She softened somewhat, but the call ended shortly after, leaving me with a sense of unease I couldn't quite define. For the next 72 hours, my communication with Rebecca was minimal. She didn't respond to most of my messages, and when she did, it was with short, insubstantial texts. I tried calling several times, but every call went to voicemail. The anxiety I'd been feeling turned into genuine concern. What if she was sick? What if something serious had happened that she didn't want to tell me so I wouldn't worry about my important work? Or, and this thought began to form reluctantly in my mind, what if there was someone else? On March 24th, I boarded the flight from Tokyo to Portland with mixed emotions. There was professional pride in the successful project I had completed, the satisfaction of knowing my international reputation was now solidified. There was the natural excitement of returning home after 3 weeks in a foreign country. But overshadowing all of this was a growing apprehension about what I would find when I got home. The recent strange communications with Rebecca had planted seeds of doubt that I couldn't completely ignore. The 13-hour flight felt even longer because of my anxiety. I tried to distract myself with movies, work, and even sleep, but my mind kept returning to Rebecca and our home. Why had she become so distant? What had changed in the 3 weeks I'd been away? Was I overreacting, turning a simple case of homesickness and stress into something more sinister? Part of me hoped that when I got home, I'd find everything normal, that my worries would prove unfounded, and that Rebecca and I would laugh together about how I'd let my imagination run wild. I took a taxi from the airport, exhausted from the long trip but eager to finally be home. It was around 9 p.m. when the taxi pulled up in front of our house in Lake Oswego. The first thing I noticed was that all the lights were off. Strange, I thought, since Rebecca knew exactly when I would arrive and would usually leave at least the porch light on to welcome me. I paid the driver, grabbed my bags, and walked to the front door, a feeling of unease growing with each step. I inserted my key into the lock and opened the door, calling out to Rebecca as I entered. Honey. I'm home. Utter silence was the only response. I turned on the entryway lights and froze, unable to process what I was seeing. The coat rack where we normally hung our coats was empty. The console table where we kept our keys and mail was gone. I inched through the house, turning on lights as I went, each new room revealing more absences. The living room, once furnished with our Italian leather sofa, comfortable armchairs, and mahogany side tables, was practically empty. Only the rug remained, along with a few smaller decorative pieces that seemed to have been left behind because they were difficult to transport. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. In our bedroom, Rebecca's closet was completely empty, not a single piece of clothing, not a single pair of shoes, not a single accessory remained. The drawers of the dresser she used were also empty, as if she had never existed in that space. My own closet had been partially emptied, my most expensive clothes, custom suits, Italian shoes, and the small watch collection I had accumulated over the years, including a Rolex that had cost $32,000, were all gone. In the master bathroom, Rebecca's beauty products were gone. In the office, my personal computer, a high-end MacBook Pro I'd recently purchased for $3,800, was missing, along with other valuable electronics. The feeling was surreal, as if I'd walked into the wrong house, or as if I were living a particularly vivid nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I went back down to the first floor and entered the kitchen, the last room I hadn't checked yet. The refrigerator was practically empty, with only a few basic items remaining. The cabinets were in a similar state, only a few plates, glasses, and non-perishable food items had been left behind. On the counter, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a folded piece of paper with my name written in Rebecca's elegant handwriting. With trembling hands, I picked up the paper and unfolded it. "Nathan," the brief note read, "our marriage is over. Don't try to find me. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The divorce papers will arrive soon. Rebecca." That was it. No explanation, no apology, nothing that suggested any remorse or even acknowledgement of the 10 years we had shared. I read the note over and over, as if additional words might magically appear if I looked closely enough. The calculated coldness of the message was almost as shocking as the state of the house. My first instinct was to call Rebecca, demand an explanation, try to understand what had happened to cause such a dramatic and seemingly sudden rupture. I grabbed my cell phone with clumsy fingers and dialed her number. The call went straight to voicemail, without even ringing. I tried again, with the same result. I sent a message, "Rebecca, what's going on? Please call me. We need to talk." No response. I sent another, and another, each more desperate than the last. Absolute silence. In a state of shock and confusion, I did the only thing that seemed logical at the time, I called the police. When the 911 operator answered, I tried to explain the situation as best I could. "My name is Nathan Miller. I just got back from a business trip, and my house was ransacked. My wife is missing, along with many of our belongings." The operator asked several questions: how long I'd been gone, if there were signs of a break-in, if I'd tried to contact my wife, before informing me that they would send a patrol car to investigate. As I waited for the police, sitting on the floor of the empty living room, I tried to process what was happening. How could Rebecca do this? How could she simply erase 10 years of shared history without any explanation, without any chance for dialogue? Even if she wanted to end the marriage, why so coldly and calculatingly? And how had she managed to remove so much furniture and belongings in such a short time, without arousing the neighbors' suspicions? Thinking about the neighbors, I decided to try the couple who lived next door, the Thompsons. Maybe they'd seen something, maybe they knew where Rebecca was. I walked to their door and rang the bell, aware that it was almost 10:30 p.m. and I might be disturbing them. David Thompson answered, still dressed but clearly preparing to retire for the night. His face showed surprise when he saw me. "Nathan. You're back. I thought you were, well, never mind. What can I do for you?" "David, have you seen Rebecca lately? Or noticed anything strange going on in our house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. David's expression changed to something between discomfort and pity. "Well, yes. About 4 days ago, I saw a moving truck in your driveway. Rebecca said you were moving to Seattle because of a new job opportunity for you. She said you were already there, getting everything ready, and that she was just finishing the move." He paused, realizing from my expression that this was the first time I'd heard this story. "That's not true, is it?" "No," I replied, feeling a fresh wave of shock. "I was in Tokyo for work for 3 weeks. I just got back and found the house practically empty. Rebecca's missing." David looked genuinely disturbed. "Oh my God, Nathan, I'm so sorry. If we'd known. I mean, it seemed perfectly normal. She was supervising the movers, everything seemed organized. She even gave us her new address in Seattle so we could stay in touch. Here, let me get that." He returned a moment later with a piece of paper with a Seattle address written on it. I immediately recognized it as a fake, it was a non-existent street in a neighborhood I knew well. I thanked David for his help and returned home just in time to see a police car pull up in the driveway. Two officers got out, introducing themselves as Officer Wilson and Detective Lewis. I explained the situation again, showing them Rebecca's note and sharing what David Thompson had told me. They quickly searched the house, confirming there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. "Mr. Miller," said Detective Lewis, a middle-aged man with discerning eyes and an expression that suggested he'd seen it all in his career, "based on what we're seeing here and the note left by your wife, this appears to be a case of marital separation, not a traditional crime. Your wife apparently decided to leave you and took several items from the marital home. Unfortunately, this type of situation falls more under the civil rather than criminal jurisdiction." "But what about my personal belongings?" I asked, feeling a mixture of despair and anger rising. "She took things that were exclusively mine: clothes, watches, electronics. Isn't that theft?" Lewis sighed, adjusting his police cap. "In the context of a marriage, the line between individual and marital property can get blurry. We can file a police report documenting the missing items, but honestly, you'll probably need to work this out with a divorce attorney. If your wife is claiming these items are part of the marital estate, a legal determination as to who is entitled to what will be necessary." I nodded mechanically, understanding the logic but feeling completely helpless. The officers filled out the report, photographed several rooms in the house, and promised to contact me if they discovered any information about Rebecca's whereabouts. Before they left, Detective Lewis handed me his card. "Call me if you remember anything else or if your wife gets in touch. And Mr. Miller, I don't want to sound callous, but based on my experience, given the level of premeditation here, you should also check your bank accounts and credit cards as soon as possible." As soon as the police left, I followed Lewis's advice and grabbed my spare laptop, which I had thankfully brought with me to Tokyo. I connected to the internet and accessed my banking app, mentally preparing myself for what I might find. The reality, however, was far worse than I could have anticipated. Our joint account, where we kept approximately $50,000 for household expenses and minor emergencies, was completely empty. This in itself would have been a significant blow, but not entirely unexpected given the circumstances. The real horror came when I checked my personal and investment accounts. The accounts in my name alone, which contained my entire life savings, approximately $780,000 in savings, investments, and retirement funds, had also been emptied. Only a few dollars remained in each account, as if whoever had drained them had deliberately left minimal amounts to avoid automatic closure. The shock was so profound that for a few moments I was completely paralyzed, unable to breathe or think coherently. How was this possible? Rebecca had no authorized access to these accounts. I never shared my passwords or login information with her. As a cybersecurity professional, I was meticulous about protecting my financial data. The most recent transactions showed transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, all made within the last 10 days, while I was in Tokyo. In some of them, I could see some of the recipients' data, offshore bank names, partial account numbers that meant nothing to me. The magnitude of the betrayal was incomprehensible. Rebecca hadn't just left me, she had methodically planned to destroy me financially. The callousness and premeditation required to execute this plan were terrifying. How could I have lived with someone for 10 years, shared a bed, meals, dreams, and never realized their capacity for such calculated cruelty? I spent the rest of that night in a state of shock alternating with bursts of frantic activity. I called all the financial institutions involved, reporting what I believed to be fraud. The representatives were friendly but not immediately helpful. They would need to investigate the transactions, they said, which could take days or weeks. When I asked how anyone other than me could have access to the accounts, one of the bank representatives checked the records and told me something that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Miller, according to our records, you added Rebecca Miller as a joint account holder on all your accounts in December of last year. We have the signed authorization forms on file." "That's impossible," I replied, my voice shaking with anger and confusion. "I never authorized this. I never signed such documents. I understand your concern, sir, the representative said, in a tone that suggested he had heard similar denials countless times before. I can send copies of the forms for you to review. If you believe your signature was forged, you will need to file a specific police report for fraud and work with our security team to initiate an investigation. In the hours that followed, I received scanned copies of the supposed authorization forms I had signed by email. Looking at them, I felt a mixture of horror and perverse admiration. The signature on the documents was, to the untrained eye, indistinguishable from my own. Someone had meticulously studied my signature and replicated it with enough precision to fool the bank staff. This level of forgery required considerable skill and practice. Rebecca had planned this for months, perhaps years, patiently observing, practicing, waiting for the perfect moment to execute her scam. Dawn found me still awake, sitting in the nearly empty kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in my hand, trying to comprehend how my life had fallen apart so completely in less than 24 hours. The exhaustion of the trip combined with the emotional shock left me in an almost hallucinatory state. It seemed impossible that just a day earlier I'd been in Tokyo, proud of the work I'd accomplished, eager to return home to my wife, to the life I believed I had. The current reality seemed like a cruel joke from the universe. With the first ray of sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, I made a decision. I would not allow Rebecca to get away with destroying my life. Not just with money and material possessions, but with the fundamental betrayal of trust, the complete disregard for our 10 years together, the calculated cruelty of her actions. In that moment, I promised myself that I would do everything in my power to hold her legally accountable, to recover what had been stolen from me, and to ensure that she faced the consequences of her actions. My first step was to find a lawyer who specialized in complex divorce and fraud cases. After some quick research and phone calls, I was able to schedule an emergency consultation with James Anderson, a renowned Portland attorney known for his aggressive approach and track record of success in high-conflict cases. His firm agreed to see me at 10 a.m. that morning, an extraordinary concession that reflected both the urgency of the situation and, I suspect, the lucrative potential they saw in the case. Anderson's office was located in an elegant building in downtown Portland, overlooking the Willamette River. The receptionist led me to a conference room where Anderson was waiting, a tall, thin man with meticulously combed gray hair and piercing blue eyes behind rimless glasses. He stood to greet me, his firm handshake exuding confidence and authority. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances. Please sit down and tell me everything, from the beginning." For the next hour, I recounted the entire story, beginning with the day I met Rebecca and ending with the discovery of the emptied bank accounts. Anderson listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad or interrupting with insightful questions. He was particularly interested in the forgery of my signature on the bank documents and the coordinated manner in which Rebecca had removed the property from the house. "This demonstrates a level of premeditation that will be significant in court," he commented. When I finished my narrative, Anderson placed his pen on the table and interlaced his fingers. "Mr. Miller, I'll be blunt with you. We have a serious case of spousal fraud here. Your wife executed an elaborate scheme to misappropriate your assets and funds, falsified documents, and planned it all considerably in advance. The good news is that fraud is illegal, even within the context of a marriage, and we have solid grounds to not only contest the division of assets in the divorce, but potentially pursue criminal charges. What's the bad news?" I asked, recognizing the rhetorical pattern. Anderson smiled humorlessly. "The bad news is that recovering your assets can be a long and complicated process, especially if your wife has already transferred the money to offshore accounts or converted it into hard-to-trace forms like cryptocurrency or physical assets under different names. The more time passes, the harder it becomes to follow the money trail. What can we do now? What are the first steps?" I asked, eager to act immediately. "First, we need to file emergency motions to freeze any assets we can still identify. Second, hire a private investigator to locate your wife. We need to know where she is to serve legal documents. Third, gather all possible evidence of the fraud, the forged documents, bank records, neighbors' testimonies, anything that establishes a pattern of fraudulent behavior. And fourth, file a formal criminal complaint in addition to the civil divorce proceedings. I nodded, feeling slightly calmer now that I had a concrete plan of action. How long will all this take? Honestly? Months, possibly years for a complete resolution. Courts aren't known for their speed, and complex cases like this tend to drag on. But we can get some early wins quickly, emergency injunctions, notices to financial institutions, that sort of thing. What about the costs? I asked, suddenly aware of my precarious financial situation. Anderson didn't hesitate. My hourly rate is $450. For a case of this complexity, I estimate total legal costs between $75,000 and $100,000, possibly more if it goes to full trial. The private investigator will be an additional cost, as will any experts we need to consult. He paused, studying my expression. I know this is substantial, especially considering your current situation. I can accept a smaller initial payment and establish a payment plan. And if we win, when we win, we can potentially recover attorney's fees as part of the settlement. It was an astronomical sum, but what alternative did I have? I'll find a way, I replied. I have a line of credit in my name that Rebecca didn't know about, and my brother can probably lend me something to get started. The important thing is to get what's mine back and make sure she doesn't get away with it. Anderson nodded approvingly. That's the right move. Oh, one last question before we wrap up. Given your profession in cybersecurity, did you maintain any kind of monitoring or data backup on your home or personal devices? The question triggered a memory. About 8 months earlier, after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, I had installed an advanced home security system. The system included discrete cameras in common areas of the house and, crucially, an automatic backup of all devices connected to our home network. The recordings and backups were stored on a secure server that I accessed remotely. In the chaos of the last 24 hours, I had completely forgotten about this system. Actually, yes, I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time. I have security cameras installed at home and an automatic backup system for our devices. I didn't mention this to Rebecca explicitly, it was mostly a passive security measure. Anderson's eyes lit up. This is a complete game changer, Mr. Miller. If we have recordings of your wife planning or executing this fraud, or evidence in the backups of compromising communications, it could be the deciding factor in your case. We need access to this data immediately. That same night, after signing the initial documents with Anderson and making the down payment using my emergency line of credit, I returned to the empty house determined to access the security system. Using my spare laptop, I connected to the remote server where the backups were stored, praying that Rebecca hadn't discovered and disabled the system. To my immense relief, the server was intact and working perfectly. The cameras had recorded activity in the house throughout my absence. I began reviewing the recordings, starting the day after my departure for Tokyo. The first recordings showed Rebecca behaving normally, working on her laptop in the living room, making calls, watching TV. Nothing suspicious. Fast forward to the following week, and that's when things started to get interesting. Rebecca received a visit from a woman I recognized as Ashley, her supposed best friend. The two talked intensely in the kitchen, frequently glancing around as if checking to see if they were alone, ironically, looking directly at the hidden camera without realizing it. Unfortunately, the camera angle didn't capture clear enough audio to understand the entire conversation, but I could make out fragmented phrases like, "Everything's ready," and, "He doesn't suspect a thing." 2 days later, Rebecca received another visit, this time from a man she'd never seen before. Tall, athletic, with dark hair and a confident smile that immediately displeased me. They greeted each other with a passionate kiss that lasted too long to be casual or platonic. My stomach churned as I watched my wife in the arms of another man, in our home, on our couch. But the initial pain soon gave way to cold anger as I realized this was just the tip of the iceberg of Rebecca's betrayal. Over the next few days, the man, whom Rebecca called Mark, recurred several times. On one visit, they spread documents across the dining table and spent hours studying them together. The camera didn't capture enough detail to identify the documents, but considering subsequent events, I strongly suspected they were related to the forgeries and financial planning for the scam. The most revealing moment came about a week before my scheduled return. Rebecca and Mark were in the office, where a camera had been set up near the bookshelf. Mark was sitting at the desk, working on something with rapt concentration, while Rebecca watched over his shoulder. "It's perfect," she said, loud enough to be captured clearly. "No one will question that. You're a genius, Mark." He turned his face to kiss her again. "Years of practice, baby. Told you that time behind bars wasn't entirely wasted." They laughed together, a sound that made my blood boil. Mark had been to prison. And clearly, she was referring to forgery skills. In the final 3 days before my arrival, footage showed Rebecca and Mark supervising a team of movers methodically removing furniture and boxes from the house. Rebecca seemed completely in control, directing the men efficiently, occasionally checking a list on her phone. The process was surprisingly orderly and quick, professional from start to finish, without the chaos we typically associate with last-minute moves. This only confirmed what I already suspected: this plan had been meticulously planned for months. While the camera recordings provided valuable information, the real treasure lay in the device backups. The system had regularly captured data from the computers and tablets connected to the home network, including Rebecca's personal laptop, which she clearly didn't know was being monitored. In the backup files, I found a goldmine of evidence: emails between Rebecca and Mark explicitly discussing their plan to clean my accounts, text messages detailing how to forge my signature, even a spreadsheet listing all the valuable items in the house with their estimated values and removal priorities. Even more troubling was the discovery that Rebecca had installed a keylogger on my main computer months earlier, software designed to record every keystroke, capturing passwords, account numbers, and other sensitive information. As a cybersecurity professional, I was horrified that I hadn't detected it, but the program was sophisticated and well hidden, likely installed while I was away from home. This explained how she had gained access to my personal financial accounts. The evidence was overwhelming. Rebecca and Mark had not only committed spousal fraud and theft, but they had meticulously documented their own crime. In one particularly damning email exchange, Rebecca wrote, "Once he's in Tokyo, we'll have 3 full weeks to execute everything. When he returns, he'll find nothing but empty walls and empty accounts. The cherry on top will be when he realizes he can't prove anything." With hands shaking with anger and a strange sense of vindication, I began gathering and organizing all the evidence. I spent the entire night downloading, cataloging, and backing up everything on multiple devices. In the end, I had a complete and devastating file that documented not only what Rebecca had done, but how, when, and with whom she had planned every detail. At 8 a.m. the next morning, exhausted but determined, I called James Anderson. "I have something you need to see," I said simply. "Change your plans for the day. This will change everything." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Anderson's conference room again, this time with my laptop connected to a large wall-mounted screen, where I methodically presented all the evidence I had uncovered. Anderson watched with growing interest, occasionally asking me to pause to examine specific details or take notes. When I finished, he remained silent for several moments, clearly processing the volume and quality of the evidence I had presented. "In 30 years of practicing law," he finally said, "I have rarely seen a case with such complete and compelling evidence. Your wife and this man, Mark, openly conspired to commit multiple crimes: fraud, forgery, cyber intrusion, grand theft. With this material, not only can we ensure that you recover your assets in the divorce proceedings, but there is a solid basis for serious criminal charges against both of you. What do we do now?" I asked. "First, I will review all these materials with my team and prepare updated court filings. Second, I will contact the district attorney's office with this evidence. They will need to open a formal criminal investigation. Third, our investigator has identified a possible location where Rebecca is staying, a resort in Miami. With this new evidence, we can obtain a court order to freeze any identifiable accounts or assets immediately. In the following days, the legal machinery began to move with surprising speed. Anderson, energized by the momentum of the case, worked tirelessly, filing multiple motions and securing an emergency hearing with a judge to discuss the freezing of assets. The district attorney's office also showed immediate interest, assigning a prosecutor experienced in financial crimes to review the case. Meanwhile, the private investigator confirmed that Rebecca was indeed staying at the Fontainebleau Miami Beach, one of the city's most luxurious resorts, apparently enjoying the fruits of her crime. Surveillance photos obtained by the investigator showed Rebecca poolside, drinking expensive champagne and laughing next to a man who exactly matched Mark's description from the security footage. A background check revealed his full name as Mark Stevens, a former college boyfriend of Rebecca's with a criminal record that included a year in prison for document forgery 5 years earlier. The pieces of the puzzle now fit perfectly. They had likely maintained some sort of contact over the years, or had recently reconnected, and together they planned this elaborate scam against me. 10 days after my return to Portland, we had our first major legal victory. The judge granted an emergency injunction freezing all of Rebecca and Mark's identifiable assets, including bank accounts and credit cards, and even prohibiting the sale of any recently acquired properties or vehicles. Most significantly, the judge issued formal subpoenas requiring both parties to appear at a hearing in Portland the following week. The official notice was delivered to Rebecca at the resort, in front of other guests, a small but satisfying moment of poetic justice that the investigator took care to photograph for me. The night before the scheduled hearing, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, worried it might be Rebecca trying to manipulate or threaten me in some way. But curiosity got the better of me, and when I answered, I was surprised to hear the voice of Ashley, Rebecca's best friend. "Nathan, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice nervous and hesitant. "About Rebecca. There are things you need to know, things I think might help you." We arranged to meet at a neutral cafe that afternoon. Ashley arrived looking pale and anxious, a far cry from the confident, outgoing woman I'd met at social events over the years. She sat across from me, her eyes avoiding direct contact, her hands fidgeting with the edge of a paper napkin. "Rebecca started changing about a year ago," she began, speaking softly as if afraid to be overheard even in a public place. "She got a text from Mark, her college ex, and something about her just changed. At first, she said they were just casual conversations, that they'd made up after years of no contact. But I noticed how she smiled differently when she talked to him on the phone, how anxious she got, constantly checking messages." Ashley took a sip of her coffee, as if gathering courage from the bitter liquid. "Then, about 6 months ago, she started talking about how unhappy she was with you. She said you were too predictable, too straight-laced, that life with you had become dull and that Mark made her feel alive again. I tried to advise her to be honest with you, to ask for a divorce directly if that's what she wanted. But then she mentioned something about how smart she would be to leave the marriage with more than just her own things." My stomach lurched at those words. Ashley continued, speaking more quickly now, as if trying to quickly shake off the weight of the confession. "I didn't think much of it at the time, I thought it was just momentary frustration. But then, when you left for Tokyo, she started acting really strange. She asked me to be her alibi, to confirm we were together if you called asking. That's when I realized something really serious was going on." "Why are you telling me this now, Ashley?" I asked, unable to completely hide the bitterness in my voice. "Why didn't you warn me sooner?" She finally looked directly into my eyes, hers filled with seemingly genuine guilt. "Because I was a coward, Nathan. Because Rebecca had been my friend longer than you, and because, honestly, I was afraid of her. When I heard about the lawsuit and the fraud charges, I realized how far she'd gone. I swear I didn't know she was planning to steal your money or sell your things. I thought it was just an affair. Which is bad enough, I know. What do you know about Mark?" I asked. Ashley hesitated. "Not much beyond what Rebecca told me. They dated in college, broke up when he got into some legal trouble. She mentioned he had special skills that would be useful, but never elaborated. Now I understand she was probably referring to the forgery. Are you willing to testify about this in court? I asked directly. She nodded slowly. Yes. I also have some messages from her that might corroborate some of what I'm saying. I know this doesn't make up for my silence earlier, but it's the least I can do now. Ashley's testimony would be a valuable piece in the legal puzzle we were piecing together. Before the hearing, I shared this new information with Anderson, who agreed that she would be a key witness. This further establishes the pattern of premeditated behavior and provides additional context about her relationship with this Mark, he explained. The judge will clearly see that this was not a spur-of-the-moment impulse or a misunderstanding, but a calculated plan executed over months. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was surprisingly full for a preliminary hearing. Apparently, marital fraud cases of this magnitude attracted considerable interest. Rebecca arrived accompanied by her attorney, Robert Dawson, an expensive-looking man in an impeccable suit, with an expression of confidence that seemed rehearsed. Rebecca avoided looking in my direction, holding her head high in a display of defiance that belied her nervous eyes. When our eyes finally met momentarily, I saw no trace of the woman I thought I'd known for a decade. Her eyes were cold, calculating, as if she were looking at a stranger and not the man who had shared her life. The hearing began with opening statements from both sides. Dawson presented Rebecca as a devoted wife who simply decided to end an unhappy marriage and exercised her right to access the marital assets. According to his narrative, I was a controlling, emotionally distant, and financially restrictive husband who had forced Rebecca to take extreme measures to ensure her financial independence after the divorce. He even hinted at extenuating circumstances that would be revealed in due course, vaguely suggesting some kind of abuse or neglect on my part. The characterization was so far from reality that I almost laughed, despite the gravity of the situation. Anderson, for his part, was methodical and devastating in his presentation. He began by establishing my character through written statements from coworkers and friends, highlighting my impeccable professional reputation and consistent behavior over the years. Then, in a masterful stroke of legal strategy, he requested permission to present newly discovered audiovisual evidence. When the judge granted it, Anderson proceeded to show a carefully edited selection of the recovered security recordings and emails. The most shocking moment came when Anderson played a video recovered from Rebecca's laptop backup. In it, she and Mark openly discussed how to forge my signature on bank documents, with Mark offering technical advice based on his previous experience. The expression on Rebecca's face when the video began was one of pure shock, quickly followed by suppressed anger. She clearly hadn't expected there to be recordings of her private conversations with Mark. Her lawyer immediately tried to object, questioning the legality of obtaining the recordings, but the judge allowed the video to continue, noting that the security system was legitimately installed in my own residence. As more evidence was presented, including the explicit emails discussing the plan to empty my accounts while I was in Tokyo, Rebecca's confident demeanor began to visibly crumble. Her shoulders slumped, and she began whispering furiously to her lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The situation escalated further when Ashley was called to testify. Seeing her best friend describe her betrayal and manipulation in detail seemed to finally crack Rebecca's facade. For the first time since the hearing began, she appeared genuinely shaken, almost vulnerable. After hearing all the testimony and evidence, the judge made a preliminary ruling that exceeded our wildest expectations. He ordered the immediate and indefinite freezing of all identifiable assets of Rebecca and Mark, ordered the immediate return of all recoverable assets, and established that any assets fraudulently sold or transferred would be compensated in full. He also authorized a full criminal investigation into both of their actions, specifically mentioning possible charges of fraud, theft, forgery, and conspiracy. This court does not tolerate the blatant manipulation of the legal and financial system for personal gain, the judge declared in his closing statement. Marriage is a partnership based on trust, not an opportunity for predatory exploitation. The evidence presented today suggests a pattern of fraudulent and criminal behavior that will be duly investigated and prosecuted. As I left the courthouse that day, I briefly passed Rebecca in the hallway. For a moment, our eyes met, and something, perhaps remorse, perhaps just fear of the consequences, seemed to pass over her face. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Her lawyer quickly pushed her away, whispering urgently in her ear. It was the last time I saw her in person. In the following months, the criminal investigation against Rebecca and Mark progressed rapidly, fueled by the substantial evidence we had provided. The identified bank accounts were frozen, and several recent transfers were reversed, allowing the recovery of approximately $620,000 of the original $830,000 taken. Many of the physical assets, including furniture and electronics, were located in a storage unit rented under Mark's name and recovered. Some of my most valuable personal belongings, including the Rolex and some of the designer suits, were never found, presumably sold quickly for cash. Realizing the growing gravity of her legal situation, Rebecca's attorney began negotiations for a settlement. After several rounds of discussions, we reached a settlement. Rebecca would return any remaining funds she could access, provide detailed information about the whereabouts of sold assets, and formally confess to her role in the conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. Mark, with his prior criminal history and central role in the scheme, was not so fortunate and faced a full sentence. The divorce was finalized exactly 1 year after my return from that trip to Tokyo. The final settlement favored me heavily, as expected given the circumstances. Rebecca was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, plus ongoing financial restitution after her release. Mark received a harsher 7-year sentence, aggravated by his prior history of similar crimes. Justice had been served, at least in the legal sense of the term. Gradually, I began rebuilding my life from the rubble. I sold the house in Lake Oswego. There were too many memories there, all of them now tainted by betrayal. I bought a smaller but elegant apartment in Portland's Pearl District, a vibrant urban neighborhood that shared no association with my previous life. At work, I maintained my focus and professionalism, and ironically, my personal experience with digital fraud made me even more valuable to security-conscious clients. Friends and family formed a crucial support network during this period of rebuilding. My brother Mike, who had lent me a considerable sum to help with initial legal expenses, never pressed for repayment even after my financial situation improved. Co-workers demonstrated remarkable understanding when I occasionally needed flexibility to deal with ongoing legal issues. And gradually, some new friends entered my life, people who knew me simply as Nathan, not as that guy whose wife stole everything and ran away. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected email. It was from Rebecca, sent from the federal prison where she was serving her sentence. Nathan, the message began, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I don't expect your forgiveness, nor do I think I deserve it. What I did was unforgivable, and I'm facing the consequences now. But I wanted you to know that it wasn't all a lie. There were times, especially early on, when I truly loved you. I don't know exactly when or how that changed, how I allowed myself to be consumed by greed and resentment. Meeting Mark again was a catalyst, but the truth is, I was already changing before that, becoming someone I no longer recognize when I look in the mirror in my cell. I'm writing not to ask for a second chance or sympathy, but simply to offer what little truth I can. I'm sorry for what I did to you and what we had. It's too late for us, but I hope you find happiness again someday. Rebecca. I read the email several times, trying to decipher whether it was sincere or just another manipulation. In the end, I decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was moving forward, stronger and wiser for the experience. I decided not to reply to the email. Some doors are best left closed permanently. About 2 years after the divorce, I met someone new. Olivia was different from Rebecca in almost every way, not just in appearance or personality, but in the authenticity and transparency she brought to our relationship. An architect by training, she had expressive brown eyes and a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. We met at a fundraiser in Portland, and from the start, there was a different connection, calmer, more genuine, without the initial fireworks I'd experienced with Rebecca, but with a solidity that grew stronger with each interaction. Early in our relationship, I hesitated to open up completely. The scars from my experience with Rebecca were still fresh, and the fear of being deceived again was real and persistent. But Olivia demonstrated extraordinary patience, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, always offering space for vulnerability without demands. When I finally shared the full story of my marriage and divorce, she listened without judgment, offering support but also respecting my ongoing healing process. "We all have stories, Nathan," she said simply after I finished my narrative. "What matters isn't what happened to you, but how you choose to move forward. And from what I see, you chose strength and growth, not bitterness and mistrust. That says a lot about who you are." Over time, I learned to trust again, not blindly, as I had before, but with open eyes and a clear awareness of the value and fragility of trust. Olivia and I developed a relationship based on honesty, mutual respect, and direct communication. We built something new together, not in the shadow of my past with Rebecca, but as a separate and healthy entity. When I proposed to Olivia, it was without grand gestures or extravagance, just a sincere moment during a sunset walk in Forest Park, with a simple but elegant ring we had chosen together. We were married a year later in an intimate ceremony on Cannon Beach, with only 30 guests, close friends and family who had been with us through thick and thin. This time, I entered marriage not with naive romantic expectations, but with a mature, conscious commitment grounded in the reality of who we were as individuals and as a couple. Today, 5 years after that devastating night when I returned from Tokyo to an empty house, I can look back with a perspective that once seemed impossible. Rebecca's betrayal, as painful as it was just one chapter in my story, not its definition. The scars remain, no doubt, but they no longer limit me. I've learned to transform experience into wisdom, pain into growth. My career has flourished, becoming one of the most sought-after cybersecurity consultants in the Northwest United States. My marriage with Olivia continues to flourish, based on a foundation of honesty that we value above all else. We recently purchased a home on the Oregon coast, a place that symbolizes our new beginning, with enough space for the family we are now beginning to build. Olivia is pregnant with our first child, a boy who will arrive in a few months. If I could go back in time and speak to that broken Nathan sitting on the floor of an empty house, I would tell him to keep hoping. I would tell him that pain eventually lessens, that trust can be rebuilt, that hearts can love again. I would tell him that sometimes we need to lose something precious to discover our own strength. And most importantly, I would tell him that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it. My story isn't just about betrayal and loss, but about resilience and rebirth. It's about falling and rising stronger, about facing the worst and still choosing hope. If there's one lesson I'd like to share with you who've listened thus far, it's this: no matter how devastating the betrayal, how profound the loss, or how complete the failure seems, there's always a path forward. It may not be the path you imagined or planned, but it can lead to a place equally meaningful and satisfying. The key is to keep walking, one step at a time, keeping your eyes open to both the pitfalls and the possibilities that unexpectedly arise. If you're going through something similar right now, know that you're not alone. There are others who have walked this path before you and survived to tell their story. Find support, friends, family, therapists, support groups, people who can offer not only compassion but also perspective and practical guidance. Protect yourself legally and financially. Documentation and evidence are crucial in situations of betrayal and fraud. But most importantly, protect your heart and mind. Don't let another person's actions destroy your ability to trust or love. Healing takes time, but it is possible. Trust can be rebuilt, not as it was before, but perhaps even stronger because it is now based on experience and insight, not just hope and naivete. As I close my story, I want to thank you for listening. Sharing experiences like this helps break the isolation that often accompanies betrayal and divorce. If my journey can offer even a small comfort or guidance to someone going through difficult times, then these painful memories were worth revisiting. Remember, the end of a chapter is not the end of the book. Your story continues, and you are the main author. If you've made it this far, you probably recognize that relationships aren't always as we imagine, right? Here on this channel, you'll find a safe space where real stories like mine are told without judgment. These stories will move you, make you reflect, and perhaps even help you better understand your own experiences. If you identified with any part of my story, whether it was the betrayal, the recovery, or the new beginning, leave a comment below sharing your perspective. Your feedback helps me continue sharing these important stories. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories that show the complexity of human relationships, and don't forget to like so more people can find this community. Together, we can transform our difficult experiences into opportunities for growth and connection. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and until the next story.